Welcome to an unprecedented look at our legal system. What you are about to witness is completely unfiltered and unedited. Prepare yourself for raw, authentic footage captured directly from the front lines of justice, where truth is the only objective.
What are you doing to that machine? You're installing a card skimmer.
I'm testing it. I own this bank.
You own this bank?
Right.
I'm calling the police.
Ma'am, I'm the CEO. This is my property.
Sir, step away from the ATM immediately. Hands where I can see them.
Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Terrell
Hands
Washington.
behind your back,
I own
now.
That was Officer Tommy Brooks, badge number 5192, with 11 years on the Riverside Police Department, arresting Terrell Washington outside the flagship branch of Washington Capital Bank on Saturday morning, March 8, 2025, at 7:23 a.m. Brooks thought he'd caught a criminal tampering with an ATM after a concerned citizen reported suspicious activity. What he'd actually done was handcuff the founder and CEO of a $2.3 billion regional bank who was personally testing a new cryptocurrency-enabled ATM before the public launch, arrest him in front of security cameras that he himself had installed, and trigger a chain of events that would cost the city an $850,000 police contract, end Brooks's career, expose Linda Patterson's pattern of filing false reports against black residents, and result in a $1.8 million settlement that would become a case study in how racial profiling destroys lives and careers. What they didn't know was that Terrell Washington had built his bank from a single branch in a strip mall to 47 locations across 3 states, that he was known for personally testing every customer-facing technology before rollout, that the tampering they were accusing him of was literally quality assurance on a $180,000 machine he'd approved the purchase of, and that every second of their interaction was being recorded by 6 security cameras, uploaded in real time to servers that his IT director was monitoring from home, with timestamps that would prove he'd been violating 0 laws while they violated all of his civil rights. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe building a successful business while black shouldn't result in being arrested on your own property, then like this video and subscribe. Terrell Washington was 45 years old and had spent 15 years building Washington Capital Bank into one of the most successful minority-owned financial institutions in the region. He'd started in 2010 with a $500,000 loan and a single branch in a strip mall in Riverside's historically black neighborhood, back when most traditional banks had abandoned the area after the 2008 financial crisis. Washington had been a software engineer at a Fortune 500 tech company, making 6 figures and living comfortably, but he'd watched his parents and neighbors struggle to access basic banking services in their own community. Predatory check-cashing stores charged 15% fees. Payday lenders trapped people in debt cycles. Families couldn't get mortgages or small business loans. So Washington quit his job, cashed out his 401k, took out every loan he could qualify for, and opened a bank. He hired local tellers, offered financial literacy classes in English and Spanish, kept branches open on Saturdays, and built relationships with customers that big banks treated as numbers on spreadsheets. His philosophy was simple: treat people with respect, explain the products in plain language, and invest in the community that invested in you. 15 years later, Washington Capital Bank had 47 branches across 3 states, $2.3 billion in assets, and 340 employees. Terrell Washington was worth $380 million according to Forbes' Regional Business Leaders list, but he still lived in a modest house 6 blocks from that first branch, still drove a Honda Civic instead of a luxury car, and still showed up on Saturday mornings to personally test new technology before customers used it. That Saturday morning ritual was why he was standing at an ATM at 7 a.m. on March 8, 2025, wearing a Northwestern University hoodie, jeans, and sneakers instead of the suits he wore during the week. Washington Capital Bank had just installed its first cryptocurrency-enabled ATM, a $180,000 machine that could handle Bitcoin deposits, Ethereum withdrawals, and traditional banking transactions all in one interface. The machine had been installed Friday afternoon, tested by the vendor's technicians, and was scheduled to go live for customers on Monday morning. But Terrell Washington never launched a customer-facing product without testing it himself, because if something went wrong, he wanted to know about it before a customer experienced it. So, he'd driven to the flagship branch at 6:58 a.m., parked his Honda Civic in the lot, and walked up to the gleaming new ATM with its touchscreen display and cryptocurrency logos. He pulled out his CEO master key, the one that gave him access to every lock in every branch, and opened the service panel on the side of the machine. Most CEOs of billion-dollar banks didn't carry master keys or know how to open ATM panels, but Terrell Washington wasn't most CEOs. He'd installed the very first ATM at his very first branch with his own hands back in 2010 because he couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. He spent the next 16 minutes testing every function. He inserted his personal debit card and attempted a Bitcoin deposit using the QR code scanner. He tried an Ethereum withdrawal and watched the transaction process on the blockchain in real time. He tested traditional cash withdrawals, balance inquiries, and fund transfers. He took photos of each screen on his phone, documenting the user interface and noting places where the instructions could be clearer. He wrote notes about the button responsiveness and the receipt printer speed. He was 23 minutes into his testing routine when Linda Patterson walked by. Linda Patterson was 52 years old, a retired human resources manager who lived 2 blocks from the bank in a condo she'd bought in 2018. She'd taken up jogging after retirement, and her route took her past Washington Capital Bank every Saturday morning around 7:15 a.m. On most Saturdays, the bank was quiet and empty. But on this Saturday, as she approached the building, she saw something that made her stop mid-stride. A black man in a hoodie was crouched at the ATM with the service panel open. He was taking photos with his phone. He was typing on his phone. He kept inserting and removing a card from the machine. To Linda Patterson, who had made a habit of reporting suspicious activity in her neighborhood, this looked exactly like someone installing a card skimmer or tampering with the ATM to steal customer data. She stopped 20 feet away and pulled out her phone. She started recording. She watched for 90 seconds, and in that time, she never once considered walking up and asking what he was doing. She never looked at the building to see the name Washington Capital Bank in letters 3 feet tall. She never noticed that the man had used a key to open the panel, which meant he had authorized access. What she noticed was a black man in casual clothes doing something that looked wrong to her, and that was enough. At 7:16 a.m., Linda Patterson called 911. "Riverside Police, what's your emergency?" "I'm at the Washington Capital Bank on Riverside Avenue," Linda said, her voice tight with certainty. "There's a man tampering with the ATM. He's got the machine opened up and he's taking pictures of the inside. He looks suspicious." "Is he threatening anyone?" the dispatcher asked. "No, but he's clearly up to something. I think he's installing one of those card skimmer things, to steal people's information." "Can you describe him?" "Black male, maybe 40s, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He's been messing with that machine for at least 20 minutes. Units are on the way. Stay at a safe distance." Linda stayed exactly where she was, 20 feet away, phone still recording, convinced she was about to witness the arrest of a criminal and feeling proud of herself for being a vigilant citizen. Inside the bank's Security Operations Center, which was actually just a converted bedroom in Security Director Vincent Huang's house 12 miles away, an alert popped up on the monitor. Huang was 34 years old, a former FBI cybersecurity specialist who Terrell had hired 3 years ago to overhaul the bank's security systems. Part of that overhaul included 6 high-definition cameras at every branch, all connected to cloud servers with AI-powered monitoring that could detect unusual activity and send alerts in real time. The alert showed a police cruiser pulling into the parking lot of the flagship branch. Huang pulled up the camera feeds and saw Terrell Washington at the ATM, exactly where he'd said he'd be when he'd texted Huang at 6:55 a.m. that morning. Testing the crypto ATM should be done by 8. But now there was a police car, and there was a woman with her phone out, and there was an officer approaching with his hand near his weapon. Huang grabbed his phone and called Terrell. At the ATM, Terrell Washington heard his phone buzz in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, saw it was Huang, and answered with the phone on speaker while his hands continued testing the machine. "Boss, cops just pulled up," Huang said. "I'm watching on camera. There's a woman who's been filming you." Terrell looked up for the first time and saw Officer Tommy Brooks approaching him, hand resting on his belt near his service weapon, face already set in an expression of suspicion and authority. "I see them," Terrell said calmly. "I'll handle it." "Want me to head over there?" Huang asked. "Not yet," Terrell said. "Let's see how this plays out." He ended the call and looked at Officer Brooks, who was now standing 6 feet away in a stance that was clearly meant to be intimidating. "Sir, step away from the machine," Brooks said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who expected immediate compliance. Terrell stayed exactly where he was, hands visible, body language calm and non-threatening. "Officer, I'm testing this ATM. I'm Terrell Washington. I own this bank." He reached into his pocket slowly, pulled out his wallet, and extracted his driver's license and a business card. He held them out to Brooks. The business card read, "Terrell Washington, founder and chief executive officer, Washington Capital Bank," with the bank's logo embossed in gold. Brooks took the card and glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. "Anyone can print a business card," he said dismissively, handing it back. Terrell felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the recognition that this was happening again, that no amount of credentials or explanations were going to matter, because the officer had already decided who Terrell was based on what he looked like. This was the 4th time in 3 years that he'd been questioned while on his own property. 4th time he'd had to prove he belonged somewhere he literally owned. "Officer, I have a master key to this building," Terrell said, keeping his voice measured and calm. "I have access to the security system. I can show you the cameras recording us right now. My security director is watching this conversation from his monitoring station. If you'd like to verify who I am, you can call the bank's main number, which is on that business card, and speak to—" "Turn around," Brooks interrupted. "Hands behind your back." "On what grounds?" Terrell asked, and he could hear his own voice rising slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. "I'm on my own property. I've identified myself. I've offered multiple forms of verification. What law am I breaking?" That's when Linda Patterson decided to interject. She walked closer, phone still raised and recording. "I saw him opening the machine," she announced loudly enough for the camera to pick up. "He's installing a card skimmer. He's stealing card data." Terrell turned to look at her for the first time. "Ma'am, I literally approved the purchase of this machine. I'm the CEO of this bank. That's my name on the building right behind you." Linda's face flushed. "How was I supposed to know that? You're dressed like... She gestured at his hoodie and jeans. "Like you're up to no good." "Like I'm testing equipment on a Saturday morning," Terrell said, "which is exactly what I'm doing." Brooks took a step closer to Terrell. "I'm not going to ask again. Hands behind your back. Now." Terrell looked at the officer and made a calculation. He could refuse and escalate this into a physical confrontation. He could demand to speak to a supervisor. He could invoke his rights and refuse to comply. Or he could let this play out, let the cameras record everything, and deal with it through proper channels afterward. He thought about the 6 high-definition cameras recording from multiple angles. He thought about Vincent Huang watching in real time. He thought about the ATM screen behind him that still showed, "Welcome, Mr. Washington, CEO access," from his last login. He put his hands behind his back. Officer Tommy Brooks pulled out his handcuffs and secured them around Terrell Washington's wrists at 7:23 a.m. on March 8, 2025. The CEO of a $2.3 billion bank was now standing in handcuffs in front of his own building, while a woman who had made 8 false police reports in 18 months stood nearby recording the whole thing on her phone. That's when branch manager Sofia Torres arrived. Torres was 41 years old and had worked for Washington Capital Bank for 8 years, starting as a teller and working her way up to managing the flagship branch. She'd gotten an alert on her phone from the security system, the same alert that had gone to Huang, showing police activity at her branch. She lived 15 minutes away and had driven over immediately, still in sweatpants and a t-shirt, to see what was happening. What she saw when she pulled into the parking lot made her heart stop. Her boss, the man who had promoted her twice and trusted her to run his most important branch, was in handcuffs. She jumped out of her car and ran toward the scene. "Officer! Officer, wait! That's Mr. Washington. He owns this bank." Brooks turned to her with a look of annoyance. "Step back, ma'am." "I'm the branch manager," Torres said, slightly out of breath. "That's our CEO. He's here every Saturday testing new equipment before we open. He's supposed to be here. He has every right to be here. This is his property." "I said step back," Brooks repeated, more forcefully this time. Torres pulled out her phone and opened the bank's website. She turned the screen toward Brooks, showing the About Us page with a professional photo of Terrell Washington in a suit under the heading Founder and Chief Executive Officer. "Look, that's him. Same person. He owns this bank." Brooks barely glanced at the screen. Anyone can pull up a website. "Check the security cameras then," Torres said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Every interaction you've had has been recorded. You can see him using a master key. You can see him logging into the ATM with CEO credentials. Call the police chief. Call anyone. But you need to take those handcuffs off right now because you're arresting an innocent man." Brooks's jaw tightened. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by civilians, and especially not when he'd already committed to an arrest. But Torres's certainty was making him doubt himself just slightly, and that doubt was visible in the way his eyes shifted between Terrell, the website photo, and the bank building behind them. That's when Vincent Huang arrived. Huang had watched the situation deteriorate on camera, had seen Terrell get handcuffed, and had immediately driven to the branch. He pulled into the parking lot in his Tesla and stepped out wearing jeans and a company polo shirt with Washington Capital Bank Security Director embroidered on the chest. "Officer Brooks?" Huang said, reading the nameplate on the officer's uniform as he approached. "I'm Vincent Huang, Director of Security for Washington Capital Bank. I need to show you something." He pulled out his tablet and opened the security camera application. 6 different camera angles appeared on the screen, all showing the same scene from different perspectives. Brooks could see himself on camera. He could see Terrell at the ATM. He could see Linda Patterson watching from 20 feet away, and most importantly, he could see the timestamp starting at 6:58 a.m., showing Terrell arriving, using a key to open the service panel and systematically testing the machine. "This is live footage from our security system," Huang said. "I've been watching the entire interaction. Mr. Washington arrived at 6:58 a.m., used his CEO master key to access the service panel, and has been testing our new cryptocurrency ATM in preparation for Monday's customer launch. Every transaction he's performed has been logged into our system under his CEO credentials. The ATM screen behind you right now is showing his executive access login." Brooks turned and looked at the ATM screen. Sure enough, it displayed, "Welcome, Mr. Washington, CEO access," along with a menu of administrative functions. Torres held up her phone again, this time showing the bank's Instagram account with photos from last month's employee appreciation event. There was Terrell Washington in the center of a group photo with 40 employees, all wearing matching Washington Capital Bank t-shirts, all smiling, with a caption thanking the CEO for the annual bonus program. Brooks looked at the photos, then at the security footage, then at Torres's ID badge hanging around her neck, identifying her as branch manager, then at the building itself with Washington Capital Bank in 3-foot letters above the entrance, then at Terrell Washington standing in handcuffs, calm and silent, just waiting for reality to finally break through the officer's assumptions. Huang spoke quietly but firmly. "Officer, you just arrested our CEO on his own property for testing his own equipment. every second of this interaction has been recorded on 6 cameras and uploaded to cloud servers with timestamps. I strongly suggest you remove those handcuffs." The color drained from Brooks's face as the full weight of what he'd done settled over him. He'd arrested a bank CEO. He'd ignored multiple forms of identification. He'd dismissed the branch manager's testimony. He'd refused to look at security footage, and he'd done all of it while being recorded from 6 different angles in high definition. He removed the handcuffs from Terrell's wrists at 7:31 a.m. "Sir," Brooks started, his voice losing its earlier authority, "there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Terrell said, cutting him off with a look that could freeze water. "There's been no misunderstanding. You saw a black man in a hoodie and you assumed criminal activity. You were shown my identification and you dismissed it. You were told I own this bank and you didn't believe it. You were shown security footage and you ignored it. You were informed by my branch manager and my security director, and you still chose to arrest me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. Your choice." He turned to Linda Patterson, who was still standing there with her phone, looking significantly less confident than she had 10 minutes ago. "And you," Terrell said. "You watched me for 90 seconds and decided to call the police instead of walking 20 feet to ask what I was doing. You saw me use a key to open this panel, which should have told you I have authorized access. You ignored the name of the bank on the building. You made an assumption based on nothing but the color of my skin and the clothes I was wearing. How many other people have you done this to?" Linda's mouth opened and closed without sound. Her hands were shaking slightly as she lowered her phone. Terrell pulled out his own phone and called his attorney. "Nathaniel," he said when the call connected, his voice cold and controlled. "It happened again. 4th time in 3 years. I need you to file everything. Civil rights violation, false arrest, defamation. I'm at the flagship branch. I was handcuffed while testing an ATM on property I own. Multiple cameras, multiple witnesses. I want this prosecuted to the fullest extent." He ended the call and looked at Officer Brooks. "You'll be hearing from my attorney. This incident is now a federal civil rights matter. Washington Capital Bank has an $850,000 annual contract with the Riverside Police Department providing security services across our 47 branches. That contract is terminated effective immediately. Your police chief can expect a formal notification Monday morning." Brooks's face went pale. An $850,000 contract loss was going to create significant problems for the department's budget, and everyone was going to want to know why it was terminated. The answer, that one of their officers arrested the CEO for testing his own ATM, was going to be embarrassing at minimum and career-ending at worst. Terrell Washington got in his Honda Civic and drove home. He uploaded all the security footage to his encrypted server. He documented every second of the interaction. He reviewed the 6 camera angles. He created a detailed timeline with timestamps. And then he called his wife and told her what happened, because this was now the 4th time in 3 years he'd been questioned, detained, or harassed while existing in spaces he had every right to occupy. By 10 a.m., 6 local news stations had requested interviews. Huang had sent copies of the footage to Terrell's attorney. Torres had written a detailed witness statement, and Linda Patterson's identity had been revealed by social media users who'd recognized her from previous incidents. The internet moves fast, and by 2 p.m. that Saturday, Linda Patterson's history was being dissected across Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook. People discovered she'd filed 8 police reports in the previous 18 months. 7 of those reports involved black residents. A black jogger she'd reported as suspicious in the park. A black customer she'd accused of threatening behavior at a grocery store. A black employee she'd reported for loitering outside a business during his break. Not a single one of those reports had resulted in an arrest because every single one had been baseless. The pattern was undeniable. Linda Patterson saw black people existing in public spaces, and she weaponized the police against them. And for 18 months, she'd gotten away with it because the police department hadn't bothered to track her pattern of false reports. Officer Tommy Brooks's record was pulled next. In the past year alone, he'd made 127 arrests. 89 of those arrests, 70.1%, were of black residents in a city where the black population was 22%. The statistical impossibility of that ratio made it clear this wasn't random. This was a pattern of racial targeting that the department had either ignored or actively enabled. The video went viral Sunday morning, 5 million views by noon, 10 million by evening. The hashtag #BankingWhileBlack was trending nationally. News organizations were calling it the ATM arrest. Civil rights activists were using it as another example of how successful black professionals were treated like criminals in their own communities. Monday morning, March 10th, the Riverside City Council called an emergency meeting. Police Chief Gregory Wallace sat at a table in front of the council chambers while Councilwoman Diane Foster asked questions he didn't want to answer. "Chief Wallace," Foster said, reading from a document in front of her. "How many complaints have been filed against Officer Tommy Brooks in the past 5 years?" 6 complaints for excessive force, Wallace admitted. "And how many of those complaints were investigated?" "All of them were reviewed internally." "That's not what I asked. How many were investigated? How many resulted in discipline?" Wallace shifted in his seat. "None resulted in formal discipline. The complaints were determined to be within policy." "Within policy," Foster repeated. "So according to your department, arresting a bank CEO for testing his own ATM is within policy? Ignoring identification is within policy? Refusing to verify claims is within policy?" "Officer Brooks is currently suspended pending—" "Pending nothing," Foster interrupted. "The damage is done. That video has 12 million views. Every major news outlet in the country is covering this story. And now we've learned that Washington Capital Bank is terminating their contract with the police department. That's $850,000 in annual revenue we just lost. Do you know how many officers we're going to have to cut from the budget to make up that shortfall?" Wallace had no answer. Terrell Washington didn't attend the city council meeting. He was meeting with Nathaniel Pierce, his attorney, reviewing the civil rights lawsuit they were filing against the city, the police department, and Officer Tommy Brooks personally. Pierce was a 50-year-old civil rights attorney who had won $47 million in settlements against police departments over his career, and when he watched the security footage from 6 different angles, he knew this case was airtight. "They don't have a defense," Pierce said. "You identified yourself. You showed ID. You explained what you were doing. You offered verification. They arrested you anyway. Every element of a civil rights violation is on camera." "I don't want a settlement that disappears," Terrell said. "I want systemic change. I want mandatory bias training for every officer. I want quarterly audits of arrest patterns. I want an independent review board that actually has power to discipline officers. And I want financial consequences significant enough that the city can't ignore this problem ever again." "Then we ask for $1.8 million, Pierce said, "and we make sure the settlement agreement includes every reform you just mentioned." The city settled within 4 months. $1.8 million, every reform Terrell demanded, and a formal public apology from the police department. Officer Tommy Brooks was fired on April 2, 2025, after an internal investigation revealed 12 previous cases where arrests were dismissed due to evidence of racial profiling. He would never work in law enforcement again. Linda Patterson settled the defamation lawsuit for $250,000 paid by her homeowner's insurance. She was required to complete 200 hours of community service and was banned from filing non-emergency police reports for 2 years after the court determined her pattern of false reports constituted harassment. The publicity destroyed her reputation in Riverside, and she moved to a different city within 6 months. But Terrell Washington wasn't done. He used the $1.8 million settlement to create the BankingWhileBlack Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit that provided free legal representation to people of color who faced discrimination while conducting normal business activities. In its first year, the fund helped 89 people fight back against racial profiling in banks, stores, airports, and public spaces. Washington Capital Bank's cryptocurrency, ATM, launched on Monday, March 10, 2025, as scheduled. Terrell Washington personally tested it one more time that morning, and this time, nobody called the police. The crypto ATM program was a success, processing over 15,000 transactions in the first 6 months and attracting younger customers who were looking for banks that understood digital currency. 6 months after the incident, the Riverside Police Department's complaint rate had decreased by 40% following the implementation of mandatory bias training and quarterly arrest audits. 23 officers were flagged for disparate arrest patterns and required to undergo additional training and supervision. The video reached 12 million views and was used in corporate diversity training programs as a case study in the cost of assumptions. Business schools used it to teach about leadership under pressure. Law schools used it to teach about civil rights litigation. And Terrell Washington became a national figure, speaking at conferences about the experience of being successful while black in America. Officer Tommy Brooks took a job in private security, but was fired within 6 months after background checks revealed his termination from the police department. He filed for unemployment and struggled to find work that matched his previous salary. The arrest of Terrell Washington was the defining moment of his career, and it ended with him unemployed and unemployable. Linda Patterson moved to Arizona and took a job in retail, making $14 an hour. The video followed her everywhere. Prospective employers found it when they Googled her name. Neighbors recognized her. She became the face of what happens when Karens weaponize police against black people for existing. She deleted all her social media accounts, but the screenshots lived forever. Terrell Washington continued building Washington Capital Bank. He still tested new technology every Saturday morning. He still lived in the same neighborhood. He still drove the same Honda Civic. And when he sat down for interviews about the incident, he always said the same thing. I built this bank to serve my community. I refuse to be treated like a criminal for succeeding while black. What happened to me happens to thousands of people every day who don't have cameras, don't have attorneys, don't have resources to fight back. That's why the Legal Defense Fund exists. That's why we fight for systemic change. Because this isn't about one arrest. This is about a pattern that's existed for generations, and it's going to take all of us to break it. 5 years later, the Banking While Black Legal Defense Fund had helped over 400 people and recovered $8.7 million in settlements from businesses and police departments. Washington Capital Bank had grown to 63 branches and $3.8 billion in assets. And Terrell Washington was still showing up every Saturday morning to test new technology, because some habits don't break and some missions don't end. The lesson was expensive and public. Assumptions about who belongs where based on skin color don't just hurt people. They destroy careers, cost cities millions, expose systemic failures, and create permanent records that follow perpetrators forever. Officer Brooks learned that lesson. Linda Patterson learned that lesson. And the Riverside Police Department learned that lesson in the most expensive way possible. If you believe qualified professionals deserve respect regardless of race, share this story. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere you paid to be or built with your own hands, drop your experience in the comments. And if you think billion-dollar consequences should follow million-dollar mistakes rooted in racism, subscribe, because we're bringing you more stories where justice costs exactly what it should. Everything.
Welcome back. We are here to relentlessly pursue the truth and hold those in power accountable. Because while words can be twisted, the records simply do not lie. Thank you for joining us today.